I knew my fever was getting worse, but I didn't tell Julian. Because 2 days ago, when I mentioned my headache, he called me a drama queen. Standing in the kitchen, I was making tea when suddenly my hands started trembling. The kettle slipped from my grip and nearly crashed to the floor. I caught it just in time, my heart pounding as I touched my forehead. It was burning hot, like touching fire. But I said nothing. How could I? From the living room, Julian's voice rang out, sharp and impatient. Ethan, how long does it take to make tea? I quickly filled the cup, my hands still shaking badly, and carried it out to him. Julian sat on the sofa with his best friend Marcus. Both of them stared at a laptop screen displaying some business presentation. I placed the cup on the table, and Marcus looked up at me with a concerned smile. Hey, Ethan, are you all right? Your face looks really flushed. Without even glancing my way, Julian said flatly, he always looks like that. Bit dramatic, you know. Marcus's smile faded slightly, and he gave me another worried look, but he didn't say anything more. I turned back toward the kitchen when suddenly the room started spinning. I grabbed the door frame to steady myself and quietly made my way to my bedroom. The moment I closed the door, it felt like every ounce of energy drained from my body. I collapsed onto the bed, my body burning like fire, yet shivering with cold at the same time. Picking up my phone, I saw a missed call from my mother. I wanted to call her back, but if Julian overheard that I was sick and had told my family, he would get even angrier. You involve your family in every little thing, he always said with that dismissive tone. So I set the phone aside, pulled the blanket over myself, and listened to the sounds drifting in from outside my room. From the living room came the sound of Julian and Marcus laughing, casual and carefree, like everything was fine. Like I wasn't there at all. Like my pain meant absolutely nothing. I closed my eyes and tried to convince myself that maybe by tomorrow morning this fever would be gone. Maybe I would feel better, and Julian wouldn't even need to know. Maybe that would be best for everyone. But deep in my heart, a voice whispered that something about all of this was deeply wrong. The afternoon sunlight filtered through my curtains, creating strange patterns on the ceiling that I stared at for what felt like hours. Every muscle in my body ached, and when I tried to swallow, my throat felt like sandpaper. I heard Marcus and Julian talking outside, their voices muffled but animated. They were probably discussing the new project Julian had been obsessing over for weeks. The same project that made him snap at me whenever I interrupted, even just to ask if he wanted dinner. I remembered last week when I had burned my hand on the stove while cooking. It wasn't serious, just a small red mark, but it stung badly. When I showed Julian, he barely looked up from his laptop. Put some ice on it, he said, then immediately went back to typing. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something more, maybe a question about how it happened or if I was okay. But nothing came. I walked away feeling invisible. Now, lying in bed with my fever climbing higher, I wondered when things had changed between us. There was a time when Julian would notice if I was quiet, when he would ask what was wrong without me having to say anything. But that felt like a lifetime ago, like a different relationship entirely. These days, I felt more like an inconvenience than a partner, something to be managed rather than cherished. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my colleague, asking if I could cover a shift tomorrow. I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to explain that I was too sick to even stand properly. But the thought of calling in sick made my stomach turn with anxiety. What if they thought I was unreliable? What if Julian heard and made another comment about me being weak? The bedroom door was still closed, and I was grateful for that small barrier between me and the rest of the apartment. In here, I could let my guard down slightly. I didn't have to pretend I was fine or force a smile when everything hurt. I could just exist with my illness without judgment or dismissive comments. Through the wall, I heard Marcus say something that made Julian laugh loudly. The sound felt jarring against my splitting headache. I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to ease the pressure, but it only made things worse. Part of me wanted to call out, to ask if someone could bring me water or maybe some medicine from the bathroom cabinet. But the words stuck in my throat, tangled up with fear and shame. What kind of person was I becoming? Someone who was afraid to ask their own partner for help when they were sick? Someone who hid pain to avoid conflict? I didn't recognize myself anymore. The Ethan from a year ago would have marched out there and insisted on being taken care of. But that Ethan had been worn down piece by casual cruelty disguised as honesty. Evening came, and the light in my room shifted from gold to purple to dark. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, the apartment was quieter. I could hear the television playing softly and the occasional clink of dishes from the kitchen. My mouth was dry, and my lips felt cracked. I needed water desperately. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up to sitting. The world tilted dangerously, and I had to wait for it to settle before attempting to stand. When I finally made it to my feet, every step toward the door felt like walking through mud. I opened the door as quietly as possible and made my way down the hallway, one hand on the wall for support. Marcus had apparently left, because only Julian was in the living room now, stretched out on the sofa watching some documentary about technology. He didn't notice me as I shuffled toward the kitchen. I filled a glass with water and drank it greedily, the cool liquid soothing my burning throat. When I turned around, Julian was standing in the doorway. "You've been in your room all day," he said, not quite accusatory, but not concerned either. Just stating a fact. I wasn't feeling well, I managed to say, my voice coming out hoarse and strained. He studied me for a moment, and I held my breath, hoping he would see how sick I really was. But then he just shrugged. "Well, try to feel better. I have an early meeting tomorrow, and I need you to iron my shirt tonight." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the kitchen with an empty glass and a heart that felt even emptier. I set the glass in the sink and made my way back to bed, each step heavier than the last. That night, buried under blankets that couldn't warm the chills settling in my bones, I finally admitted to myself what I had been avoiding for months. This relationship was breaking me slowly but surely, and if I didn't do something about it soon, there might not be anything left of me to save. When I woke up the next morning, I immediately knew that nothing had improved overnight. In fact, everything was significantly worse. My entire body ached with a deep, persistent pain that made even breathing uncomfortable. My head throbbed with such intensity that opening my eyes fully seemed impossible. But Julian expected breakfast, and if I didn't make it, he would complain about my lack of consideration for his schedule. I forced myself out of bed, stumbling slightly as my legs protested the movement. In the bathroom, I caught sight of my reflection and barely recognized the person staring back at me. My face was ghostly pale except for two bright spots of color high on my cheeks. Dark circles under my eyes made me look like I hadn't slept in days, and my lips were dry and cracked. I looked genuinely ill, the kind of sick that should send someone straight back to bed. But I splashed cold water on my face and told myself I could manage just a little longer. Making it to the kitchen required more effort than it should have. Dizziness washed over me in waves, forcing me to grip the counter for stability as I retrieved eggs from the refrigerator. My hands trembled as I tried to crack them into the pan, and one egg completely missed, splattering across the floor in a messy puddle of yolk and whites. I was crouched down, trying to clean it up, when Marcus walked into the kitchen. He took one look at me on the floor and immediately came over. "Ethan, what are you doing down there? Get up." His hands were gentle but firm as he helped me to my feet and guided me to a chair. "Sit down before you fall down." I was shocked by the kindness in his touch. Someone was actually caring about me. "I'm okay." "You are absolutely not okay," Marcus interrupted, placing his hand on my forehead before quickly pulling it back. "Ethan, you're burning up. This is a serious fever. Did you tell Julian?" I lowered my eyes, unable to meet his gaze. He's really busy right now? I didn't want to bother him with something minor. The look Marcus gave me suggested he understood far more than I had said aloud, but he didn't push. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and said, "You sit right there. I'll handle breakfast." I sat in stunned silence, watching him move around the kitchen with easy confidence. He cooked eggs perfectly, made toast without burning it, and even prepared fresh coffee. It was such a simple thing, someone making breakfast, but it made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Julian entered the kitchen a few minutes later, buttoning his shirt while holding his phone to his ear. "Yes, the meeting is confirmed. I'll be there on time." He ended the call and approached the table where Marcus was setting down plates. For the first time that morning, Julian actually looked at me, then at Marcus. "Why are you making breakfast? What was Ethan doing?" His tone carried annoyance rather than concern. Marcus's response was clear and direct. "Ethan is sick. You need to take him to see a doctor." Julian took a bite of toast, chewed thoughtfully, then spoke as if discussing something trivial. "Ethan always has something wrong with him. It's never actually serious." I watched Marcus's jaw tighten, saw anger flash briefly in his eyes. Quickly I interjected, "Really, I'm fine." But Marcus's expression told me he had finally seen clearly what was happening in this apartment, and he wasn't going to stay silent about it much longer. The rest of breakfast passed in tense quiet. Julian scrolled through his phone between bites, completely absorbed in whatever was on the screen. Marcus kept glancing at me with obvious worry, and I tried my best to look more capable than I felt. When Julian finished eating, he stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door without a word of goodbye. Marcus lingered, clearly reluctant to leave. "Ethan, I'm serious. If you need anything at all today, call me. I mean it." He wrote his number on a piece of paper and pressed it into my hand, closing my fingers around it firmly. "Promise me you'll call if things get." I nodded, though we both probably knew I wouldn't actually call. He studied my face for a long moment, like he was trying to memorize it, or maybe trying to figure out what to do. Finally, he squeezed my shoulder gently and left. The apartment felt impossibly large and empty once I was alone. I tried to clean up the kitchen, but halfway through washing dishes, another wave of dizziness hit so hard I had to grip the sink to keep from falling. My vision went spotty around the edges, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might actually pass out right there on the kitchen floor. Eventually, I gave up and returned to my bedroom, leaving the half-cleaned kitchen behind. I crawled back into bed and pulled out my phone, staring at Marcus's number. The temptation to call him was strong, to hear a friendly voice, to have someone acknowledge that what I was experiencing was real and concerning. But I couldn't do it. What would I even say? Instead, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, pictures of Julian and me from when we first started going out together. In those images, we looked happy. He had his arm around me. We were both smiling genuinely, and there seemed to be real affection between us. When had that disappeared? Had it been gradual, so slow I didn't notice until it was completely gone? Or had there been a specific moment when everything changed? My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. For a second, I hoped it might be Julian checking on me. But the caller ID showed my younger sister, Ivy. I almost didn't answer because my voice was so weak and strained that she would immediately know something was wrong. But Ivy was persistent, and the phone kept ringing. On the fourth attempt, I finally picked up, and what I heard in her voice after just one word from me would set everything in motion. The careful balance I had been maintaining, the pretense that everything was manageable, was about to completely fall apart. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what needed to happen. By early afternoon, my condition had deteriorated significantly. I lay in bed, staring blankly at my phone. Julian had left for the office, and Marcus had gone with him, though before leaving, he had looked at me with such obvious concern and said, "If you need anything, anything at all, please call me." I had nodded, but I knew I wouldn't reach out. Because if Marcus found out how terrible I actually felt, he might tell Julian. And I couldn't handle that confrontation right now. That's when my phone began ringing. The caller ID showed Ivy, my younger sister. I considered letting it go to voicemail, since my voice was barely functional. But Ivy was stubborn. She called again, and again. On the fourth ring, I finally answered. Ethan, finally. I've been trying to reach you forever. Her energetic voice sent sharp pains through my already pounding head. I managed to whisper, Ivy, can't really talk right now. Complete silence followed. Then her voice returned, stripped of all its usual brightness. Your voice sounds terrible. You're sick, aren't you? Tell me the truth. I couldn't answer, because I genuinely didn't have the strength to form words anymore. That silence apparently told Ivy everything she needed to know. I'm coming over right now. Send me your address immediately. She stated, not asked. No. Ivy, please don't. I tried to protest, but she had already hung up. I knew with absolute certainty that Ivy would show up. She was protective to a fault, especially when it came to me. And when she arrived and met Julian, she would definitely say something. Ivy never held back her opinions, particularly when she thought someone was mistreating me. An hour passed, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. Then the doorbell rang insistently. I attempted to get out of bed, but the moment I stood upright, dizziness overwhelmed me, and I collapsed back onto the mattress. Through my closed door, I heard Ivy's voice, louder than usual and filled with worry. Ethan, open the door. Then came Julian's voice, irritated and sharp. Who is this? Why are you ringing the bell so aggressively? I'm his sister, and I need to see him right now. Ivy shot back, her tone matching his irritation with her own anger. Using every bit of remaining strength, I pushed myself off the bed, made it to my bedroom door, and emerged into the living room. The instant Ivy saw me, all color drained from her face. Ethan, she rushed forward and caught me as my legs gave out, literally holding me up in her arms. Julian observed this scene with clear annoyance. What kind of performance is this? Ivy turned to look at him with an expression of pure disgust. Performance? My brother looks like he's dying, and you think this is theater? Julian's face flushed red with anger. You have no right to speak to me that way in my own home. And you had no right to neglect him like this. Ivy's voice rose, shaking with fury. I tried to intervene, my voice barely audible. Ivy, please, it's all right. But both of them ignored me, too caught up in their confrontation to hear my weak attempt at peacekeeping. That's when Marcus walked through the door. Perhaps Julian had contacted him, or maybe he had simply decided to return. He immediately assessed the situation. Me supported in Ivy's arms, Julian and Ivy glaring at each other with open hostility. Marcus crossed the room quickly and spoke with absolute authority. Enough of this. We're taking Ethan to the hospital right now. For the first time since I had known him, Julian didn't argue or make excuses. Maybe he finally saw how genuinely sick I was. Maybe he realized that if something happened to me, he would bear responsibility. Or maybe he just wanted to end the scene that was unfolding in his living room. Ivy kept her arm around me as we headed toward the door. Can you walk? She asked softly, all the anger gone from her voice when she spoke to me. I think so, I answered, though I wasn't actually sure. The journey down to the car felt endless. Each step required tremendous concentration, and without Ivy supporting most of my weight, I would have fallen multiple times. Marcus held the door open, and Julian walked ahead without looking back, already on his phone again. In the car, Ivy sat in the back with me, holding my hand tightly. I could feel her trembling slightly, whether from anger or fear, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. Marcus drove while Julian sat in the passenger seat, still absorbed in whatever was on his phone screen. How long have you been feeling this bad? Ivy asked quietly, her thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of my hand. A few days, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. And you didn't tell anyone? You didn't call Mom? You didn't tell him? She gestured toward Julian's back with barely concealed contempt. I didn't have a good answer to that. How could I explain the complicated mix of fear and shame that had kept me silent? How could I make her understand that somewhere along the way, I had learned that my pain was an inconvenience to be hidden rather than a problem to be solved? Marcus caught my eye in the rearview mirror, his expression full of concern and something that looked like regret. Maybe he was wishing he had noticed sooner, that he had pushed harder when he saw me struggling in the kitchen that morning. The hospital parking lot appeared, and the sight of it filled me with both relief and dread. Relief because I would finally get help. Dread because I knew that once we walked through those doors, everything would become real and undeniable. There would be no more pretending I was fine, no more hiding how bad things had gotten. Ivy helped me out of the car, and we made our way toward the emergency entrance. Behind us, I heard Julian still talking on his phone, his voice carrying clearly through the parking lot. He was discussing a meeting schedule, completely detached from what was happening right in front of him. As we reached the doors, Ivy paused and looked down at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You deserve so much better than this," she said quietly. And those words hit me harder than anything else that had happened that day, because deep down, I knew she was right. And I was beginning to realize that knowing you deserve better and actually demanding it are two very different things. In the emergency room, while the doctor examined me, Ivy sat beside my bed, gripping my hand tightly. Marcus stood in the waiting area because Julian was outside on his phone. The doctor removed his stethoscope, checked the thermometer reading, and then looked at me with a grave expression that made my stomach sink. "How long have you been ignoring these symptoms?" His voice was professional, but carried an edge of disapproval that made me feel like a child being scolded. I lowered my gaze, ashamed. 3 or 4 days, I think. The doctor shook his head with clear disappointment. "You have severe dehydration, a viral infection that's spreading throughout your system. And if you hadn't come in today, you were at significant risk for sepsis. This is an extremely serious condition." Ivy's grip on my hand tightened painfully, and I could feel her body shaking beside me, even though she was trying not to cry. The doctor signaled to a nurse to start in 4 and began writing prescriptions with quick, efficient movements. "We need to admit you for a minimum of 2 days, possibly longer, depending on how your body responds to treatment." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy blanket. When the doctor left the room to arrange for my admission, Ivy turned to face me fully, tears streaming down her cheeks unchecked. 3 or 4 days? Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you call me or Mom or literally anyone who cares about you?" How could I explain it? How could I make her understand the complicated tangle of fear and shame that had kept me silent? That I was terrified Julian would think less of me? That I wanted him to see me as strong and capable, not weak and burdensome? That somewhere deep down, I believed if I could just be less trouble, he might love me the way I needed to be loved? I didn't want to worry anyone, I finally said, knowing how inadequate that sounded. Ivy shook her head forcefully, tears flowing freely. "Now you're the one suffering, and you're worried about other people being worried? That doesn't make any sense, Ethan. That's not how this works." Marcus entered the room at that moment, carrying coffee cups from the cafeteria. He handed one to Ivy, offered one to me, which I declined with a small shake of my head, and then settled into the chair on the other side of my bed. For a moment, he just sat there in silence, seeming to gather his thoughts carefully before speaking. "Ethan," he began slowly, his voice gentle but firm. "If you're not comfortable with Julian, if you feel like he's not good for you or not treating you the way you deserve, you don't have to stay in that situation. You have options." His words hit me like a physical blow, because somewhere beneath all my excuses and rationalizations, I knew he was right. I wasn't comfortable. I lived in a constant state of low-level anxiety, always monitoring Julian's moods, always trying to anticipate what might set him off, always making myself smaller to avoid conflict. "I'm managing fine," I heard myself say, but there was no conviction in my voice whatsoever. Both Ivy and Marcus looked at me with expressions that clearly communicated they saw right through my lie. Before anyone could say more, Julian walked into the room, looking rushed and mildly annoyed. He glanced at me briefly, then at the 4-bag hanging beside my bed, then at Ivy and Marcus. "What's the situation? Are they admitting you?" His tone was clipped, like he was asking about a delayed package rather than his partner's health crisis. "Yes," the nurse responded from behind him, where she was updating my chart. Julian released an irritated sigh. "Fine, I'll handle the paperwork." Then he turned and walked back out of the room without asking how I felt, without acknowledging Ivy's tear-stained face, without seeming to grasp the severity of what was happening. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded thunderously loud in the silence he left behind. Marcus and Ivy exchanged a long look, and I could see a silent understanding pass between them. They were done staying quiet. They were done watching this happen without saying anything. The nurse finished her notes and left, promising to return soon with medication. Ivy moved her chair closer to my bed, taking both my hands in hers. "This time, I need you to hear something," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions clearly churning beneath the surface. "What just happened? That's not normal. That's not how someone who loves you should act when you're in the hospital." "He's just stressed with work," I started to say, but Ivy cut me off. "No, stop making excuses for him. I've been watching this for months, and I kept telling myself it wasn't my place to say anything, that you're an adult and you can make your own choices. But I can't stay quiet anymore. He treats you like an inconvenience, Ethan. Like you're something to be managed rather than someone to be cherished." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've known Julian for 5 years. We've been friends since college. And I'm telling you, the way he is with you, it's not right. At first I thought maybe I was misreading things. Maybe it was just his communication style. But this morning, when I saw you practically collapsing in the kitchen and he barely even looked up, he trailed off, shaking his head. You deserve someone who jumps out of bed when you're sick," Ivy continued. "Someone who cancels meetings to take you to the doctor. Someone who holds your hand and tells you everything will be okay. Not someone who makes you feel like being human is a character flaw." Their words circled around me, each one finding its mark. I wanted to argue, to defend Julian, to insist they were wrong. But I couldn't, because everything they were saying aligned with what I had been trying not to admit to myself for months. "Engagements can be broken," Marcus finished. "Engagements, and all the time. It's not a life sentence. It's supposed to be a promise of a good future together. And if that's not what you're getting, then why go through with it?" A nurse came in to adjust my four, and the conversation paused. But the words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. As I lay there, watching the clear liquid drip steadily into my arm, I realized that getting physically better was only part of what I needed to heal. The bigger sickness was in how I had allowed myself to be treated, and how I had learned to make myself small and quiet and invisible. Ivy squeezed my hand again. "Just think about it, okay? You don't have to decide anything right now. Just promise me you'll actually think about it." I nodded because that much I could promise. And as the medication began to make me drowsy, I found myself actually considering what life might look like without constantly walking on eggshells, without constantly apologizing for existing, without constantly trying to earn love that should have been freely given. When evening came and visiting hours were ending, both Ivy and Marcus were reluctant to leave me alone in the hospital room. Ivy squeezed my hand and said, "I can stay. I'll sleep in the chair. They have to let family stay, right?" Her eyes were still red from earlier crying, and she looked exhausted but determined. I convinced her to go home and get proper rest, promising I would call if anything changed. Marcus lingered at the door after Ivy left, looking back at me with obvious concern etched across his features. Anything you need, no matter what time it is, you call me. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning. I mean that. The sincerity in his voice made my throat tight. Thank you, I managed to say. For everything today. For making breakfast. For bringing me here. For just being kind. He smiled sadly. That's basic human decency, Ethan. You shouldn't have to thank someone for that. After they both left, the hospital room felt simultaneously too large and too small. I lay there, listening to the rhythmic beeping of machines, the distant sound of nurses talking at their station, the occasional PA announcement echoing through the halls. The 4 in my arm was uncomfortable, and the hospital bed was nothing like my own, but I felt safer here than I had in days. Julian arrived around 11 o'clock. He hung his coat on the hook by the door and immediately pulled out his phone, settling into the visitor's chair without really looking at me. The blue light from his screen lit up his face as he scrolled through what I assumed were work emails. I watched him for several minutes. This person I had agreed to marry, and tried to remember when I had last felt truly connected to him. When had we last had a real conversation? When had he last asked about my day, or my feelings, or my dreams? Julian, I called out softly. He didn't look up, his thumb continuing to swipe across the screen. I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside me. Maybe it was the medication making me bold, or maybe it was everything Ivy and Marcus had said finally breaking through my defenses. But I suddenly needed to know the truth. Do you actually care that I'm here? That got his attention. He looked up from his phone, confusion crossing his face. What kind of question is that? A straightforward one. Do you care that I'm in the hospital? That I was so sick I could have developed sepsis? That the doctor said if I'd waited another day, things could have gotten much worse? He actually rolled his eyes, like I was being unreasonable. I'm here, aren't I? Obviously I care. But you're not really here, I said, and I could hear my voice getting stronger, more certain. You're physically present, but you're on your phone. You haven't asked how I'm feeling. You haven't asked what the doctor said beyond the basic admission information. You're here because it would look bad if you weren't, not because you're actually concerned. Julian set his phone down on the small table beside his chair, giving me his full attention for the first time since entering the room. Where is this coming from? From 3 days of being so sick I could barely stand, and being too afraid to tell you because I knew you'd be annoyed. From making myself invisible because I didn't want to be a burden. From this morning, when Marcus had to make breakfast because I was literally collapsing and you couldn't be bothered to notice. You're being dramatic, he said, but his tone was defensive now. No, I said firmly. I'm being honest. Maybe for the first time in months. He stood up, pacing to the window and back, running his hand through his hair in agitation. I don't know what you want from me, Ethan. I can't drop everything every time you have a cold or a headache or whatever. I have responsibilities. My career is demanding. You knew that when we got together. This wasn't a cold, I said quietly. And I'm not asking you to drop everything. I'm asking you to see me, to care about me, to treat me like someone you love instead of someone you tolerate. The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. Julian stared at me, and I could see him trying to formulate a response, trying to find the right thing to say to defuse this situation. But I didn't want deflection anymore. I wanted truth. I do love you, he finally said. But the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. Love isn't just words, Julian. It's actions. It's showing up. It's making someone feel valued and important and safe. And I don't feel any of those things with you anymore. I feel like I'm constantly auditioning for your approval and always falling short. He crossed his arms over his chest, his expression hardening. So what are you saying? You want to call off the wedding over this? The question hung in the air, and I realized he had asked it like a challenge, like he expected me to back down, to say of course not, to apologize for making a scene. But looking at him standing there, More concerned with defending himself than understanding my pain. I knew what my answer had to be. I'm saying that maybe we need to seriously reconsider whether we should be getting married at all. His eyes widened, genuine shock replacing the defensive anger. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything. My voice was calm now, steady. I deserve better than this, Julian. I deserve someone who doesn't make me feel like my illness is an inconvenience. Someone who doesn't make me hide pain because I'm afraid of their reaction. Someone who shows up emotionally, not just physically. He grabbed his coat from the hook, his movements sharp and angry. I have an early meeting tomorrow. We'll talk about this when you're thinking more clearly. I am thinking clearly, I said to his retreating back. Maybe for the first time in a long time. The door closed behind him with more force than necessary, and I was alone again. But this time, the solitude didn't feel lonely. It felt like the beginning of something necessary. Like the first breath after being underwater too long. I reached for the nurse call button, suddenly needing to ask for water or extra pillows or anything, just to hear another kind human voice. But as my hand hovered over it, I realized I didn't need anything except the clarity I had just found. Whatever happened next, whatever complications arose from this conversation, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done making myself small for someone who would never see me as enough. When Ivy and Marcus arrived the next morning, I was already awake and had been for hours, thinking about everything that needed to happen next. Ivy brought coffee from my favorite cafe, somehow remembering my exact order despite the chaos of yesterday. Marcus carried a bag of fresh fruit and what looked like homemade muffins. They both studied my face carefully as they set their offerings on the rolling table beside my bed. "How are you feeling?" Ivy asked, settling into the chair Marcus had occupied last night. "Physically better. The 4 fluids helped a lot." I paused, gathering courage. "Emotionally, I talked to Julian last night. Both of them went very still, waiting. Marcus remained standing, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, his expression guarded but attentive. I told him I don't think we should get married." The words came out easier than I expected, like they had been waiting for permission to exist. Ivy's hand flew to her mouth, whether in shock or relief I couldn't tell. Marcus's expression softened, something like pride flickering in his eyes. "What did he say?" Ivy asked carefully. "He told me I wasn't thinking clearly and that we'd talk later. Then he left." I picked at the hospital blanket, smoothing non-existent wrinkles. "But I am thinking clearly. Maybe more clearly than I have in months." Ivy reached for my hand. "I'm glad you're finally seeing what I've been seeing. But I also know this can't be easy." "It's not," I admitted. "Part of me keeps wondering if I'm overreacting, if I'm throwing away something good because of one bad week. But then I remember, it hasn't been one bad week. It's been months of feeling invisible. Months of apologizing for existing. Months of walking on eggshells and hoping that if I could just be less trouble, he might actually want me around." Marcus moved closer, sitting on the edge of the other chair. "You know what I noticed yesterday? When we were in the car on the way here, you apologized to me. You apologized for being sick and for going to the hospital, like it was somehow an inconvenience you had chosen to inflict on everyone." His words hit me hard, because I didn't even remember doing that, which meant it had become so automatic I didn't notice anymore. "That's not normal, Ethan," he continued gently. "You shouldn't apologize for being human, for having needs, for requiring care when you're genuinely ill." A nurse came in to check my vitals and swap out the nearly empty 4-bag. She smiled warmly at all of us, making small talk about the weather and asking if I needed anything for pain. It was such a simple interaction, but it highlighted the difference between basic kindness and what I had been accepting as love. After she left, Ivy spoke up again. "What happens when you get discharged? Are you going back to the apartment?" I had been thinking about this all morning. "No. If you meant what you said about me staying with you, I'd like to take you up on that offer. At least until I can figure out more permanent arrangements." Of course I meant it, Ivy said immediately. You can stay as long as you need. Forever, if that's what it takes. Marcus cleared his throat. I know this isn't the easiest thing to bring up right now, but have you thought about the logistics? The apartment is in Julian's name, but your stuff is there. The engagement ring, the wedding planning that's already underway. I'll need to get my things, I said, my mind already starting to organize the practical steps. And I need to tell Julian face to face that it's really over, not just something I said while medicated in a hospital bed. You don't have to do any of that alone, Marcus said firmly. Ivy and I will be there. Whatever you need. Around noon, the doctor came by to check on my progress. My fever had broken overnight, my hydration levels were improving, and he felt comfortable discharging me later that afternoon, with strict instructions for rest and follow-up care. Ivy immediately started organizing, packing up the few items I had accumulated, calling her apartment to make sure the spare room was ready. I was signing discharge papers when Julian appeared in the doorway. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well, but his expression was carefully neutral. He took in the scene. Ivy efficiently packing, Marcus standing protectively close, me holding a pin above hospital paperwork. Ready to go home? He asked, as if yesterday's conversation had never happened. I set the pin down carefully. I'm not going back to the apartment, Julian. His neutral expression cracked slightly. Don't be ridiculous. Where else would you go? We can talk about whatever's bothering you, but there's no need for this drama. It's not drama, I said, keeping my voice level. It's a decision. I'm going to stay with Ivy while I figure things out. He looked genuinely confused now, like he couldn't understand why I wasn't just falling back into our normal pattern. Figure what out? We're getting married in 4 months. The venue is booked. Your family already sent in their RSVPs. I slid the engagement ring off my finger, that ring I had worn for 2 years, that ring that had never quite felt right, that ring that had started to feel more like a shackle than a symbol of love. I held it out to him. I can't marry you, Julian. I can't spend the rest of my life feeling like I have to hide parts of myself to be acceptable to you. I can't keep pretending that this is what healthy love looks like. He didn't take the ring, just stared at it like it was something foreign. This is insane. You're making a massive decision based on a few days of being sick and emotional. Ivy stepped forward, her voice cutting. He's making a decision based on months of you treating him like he doesn't matter. This doesn't concern you, Julian snapped at her. It absolutely concerns me. He's my family, and I've watched you diminish him bit by bit for almost a year now. Marcus moved to stand beside me as well. Julian, man, I say this as someone who's been your friend for years. The way you treat Ethan isn't okay. And deep down, I think you know that. Julian looked between the three of us, and I could see him trying to find the angle, the argument, the way to regain control of this situation. But there wasn't one, because for the first time, I wasn't backing down. Keep the ring or return it. I don't care, I said quietly. But I'm leaving, and I'm not coming back. We walked out of that hospital room together. Ivy carrying my bag, Marcus clearing a path through the corridors, and me walking steadily despite the weakness still lingering in my legs. When we stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight, the fresh air felt like a baptism, like I was being born into a new version of my life. In Ivy's car, driving away from the hospital and away from Julian and away from the life I had been living, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope that things might get better if I just tried harder, but real hope. Hope that I could build something new. Hope that I deserved better and might actually find it. Hope that choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was survival. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt free. The weeks that followed were a study in slow healing. Ivy's apartment was small but warm, filled with the scent of her cooking and the sound of her humming as she moved through her daily routines. It was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile perfection of Julian's penthouse, where everything had been designed for appearance rather than comfort. Marcus visited often, bringing takeout and offering practical help, changing the locks on Ivy's spare room door, helping me file the paperwork to officially end the lease on Julian's apartment, sitting with me through the difficult phone calls to cancel wedding vendors. "You don't have to do all this," I told him one evening, after he had spent an hour on the phone with a catering company that was refusing to return our deposit. "I want to," he said simply. "That's what friends are for." I had never had a friend like Marcus before, someone who showed up without being asked, who offered help without expecting anything in return, who saw me struggling and simply stepped in. It made me realize how isolated I had become during my relationship with Julian, how I had let his indifference convince me that I didn't deserve support. Ivy was a constant presence, her fierce protectiveness a balm to my wounded soul. She didn't push me to talk, but she was always there when I needed to. She made sure I ate, even when I had no appetite. She dragged me out of the apartment on weekends, insisting that fresh air and sunlight were part of the healing process. "You're getting your color back," she observed one morning, studying me over her coffee cup. "You look less like a ghost and more like my brother." "I feel less like a ghost," I admitted. "I'm still figuring things out, but I don't feel like I'm drowning anymore." "That's because you're not." She set down her cup and reached across the table to take my hand. "You were drowning, Ethan, and I couldn't save you because you wouldn't let me in. But you're out now. You're breathing, and I'm so proud of you." Tears pricked my eyes. "I'm sorry I pushed you away. You were trying to survive. I understand that now. But promise me, no more hiding. No more suffering in silence. If you need help, you ask for it. That's what family is for." "I promise," I said. And I meant it. 3 weeks after I left, Julian showed up at Ivy's apartment. I had been expecting it. The loose ends of our shared life needed to be tied up, and there were still boxes of my belongings at his place that needed to be collected. He looked different when I opened the door. Thinner, more tired. The perfect composure he usually wore like armor had cracks in it. "We need to talk," he said. "Privately." Ivy appeared behind me, her expression wary. "Ethan, you don't have to." "It's okay," I said. "I've got this." We walked to a small cafe around the corner, the same one where we had gone on our first date. It felt like a cruel choice, but maybe Julian was trying to remind me of what we had been. Or maybe it was the only place he knew where we could talk without interruption. We ordered coffee, black for him, tea for me, and sat in uncomfortable silence for a long moment. "You look well," he finally said. "Better than you did in the hospital." "I am better. I've been taking care of myself." He nodded, his fingers wrapped around his coffee cup like it was a lifeline. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how I treated you, about how I made you feel invisible." I waited, not offering him an easy way out. "I was wrong," he said. "I see that now. I was so focused on work, on my career, on building something I thought was important, that I completely missed what was right in front of me. I missed you. I missed us. And I'm sorry." The apology was unexpected, and it landed in a way I hadn't anticipated. Part of me had been bracing for more defensiveness, more dismissal. This was something else entirely. "Thank you for saying that," I said carefully. "It means a lot." But he had heard the hesitation in my voice. "But I can't go back to how things were. Even if you've changed, even if you mean everything you're saying, the damage is already done. I spent 2 years slowly disappearing, Julian. I can't just undo that overnight. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that I can be better." I looked at him, this man I had once loved with my whole heart, and felt something shift. Not love returning, but a kind of closure settling into place. "I hope you do become better. For yourself, for whoever you end up with. But that person isn't going to be me. I need to find out who I am without you." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Maybe he saw something in my expression that convinced him it would be pointless. "Is there any chance you'll change your mind?" "No," I said gently. "There isn't." He nodded slowly, the finality of it settling over him. I really did love you, Ethan. I just didn't know how to show it. I know, I said. And I loved you too. But love isn't enough if it doesn't make you feel safe. And I didn't feel safe with you. He left after that, and I sat alone in the cafe for a long time, staring at the cold tea in front of me. I had expected to feel sad, or maybe guilty. Instead, I felt something else entirely: relief. The weight I had been carrying for years was finally gone. I was free. Months passed, and life slowly took on a new shape. I found a small apartment of my own, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I decorated it with things that made me happy: plants, books, photographs of my family. I started cooking again, rediscovering the joy of making meals for myself instead of performing domestic labor for someone who didn't appreciate it. Ivy and Marcus remained constant presences, their friendship a steady anchor as I navigated the unfamiliar waters of single life. Marcus had become something more than a friend, not a romantic partner, but a confidant, someone who had seen me at my lowest and hadn't looked away. "You're different now," he observed one evening, as we sat on my tiny balcony watching the sunset. "More present, less like you're waiting for something bad to happen." "I'm not waiting anymore," I said. "I'm just living." "That's a good thing." "It is." I smiled, and it felt genuine. I spent so long trying to be what Julian wanted that I forgot what it felt like to just be myself. I'm still figuring out who that person is, but I like her more than I like the person I was pretending to be. "You never had to pretend for me," he said quietly. "I always saw you, even when you couldn't see yourself." The words hit me harder than I expected. "Thank you," I said, "for that, for everything. I don't think I would have made it through those first weeks without you." He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "That's what friends are for." 1 year after I left Julian, I stood in my tiny apartment, surrounded by boxes and the familiar chaos of moving. Not moving away from something, moving towards something. I had found a slightly larger place, with a real kitchen and a balcony that caught the morning sun. Ivy was helping me pack, and Marcus was due to arrive with pizza and moral support. "You're really doing this," Ivy said, taping a box shut. "Starting over." "I already started over," I said. "This is just the next step." She smiled, and there was pride in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You came back from something that could have broken you. And you didn't just survive, you thrived." "I had help," I said. "You and Marcus, my family, everyone who refused to let me disappear. I couldn't have done it alone." "Maybe not. But you had to make the choice. You had to be the one to walk away. That took courage." I thought about the hospital room, the 4-drip, the quiet realization that I deserved better. I thought about the long nights of uncertainty, the hard conversations, the slow process of rebuilding. It hadn't been easy. It wasn't always linear. But I had done it. It wasn't courage, I said. It was just finally understanding that I was worth fighting for. Ivy hugged me tightly. "You always were. You just forgot." Marcus arrived with pizza and a bottle of wine, and we spent the evening sitting on the floor among half-packed boxes, eating and laughing and talking about nothing and everything. It was simple, ordinary, and perfect. Later that night, after Ivy had gone home and Marcus had headed back to his own place, I stood on my new balcony and looked out at the city lights. I had come so far from that hospital bed, from the kitchen where I had collapsed, from the months of feeling invisible. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had found my voice, my strength, my sense of self. And whatever came next, I knew I would face it as myself, whole and present and unapologetically alive. The door was open now, and I was ready to walk through it. 6 months after I left Julian, Marcus asked me out on a proper date. Not a casual coffee or a friendly dinner, a real date, with flowers and a reservation and the nervous energy of 2 people who had been dancing around something for far too long. "I know this might be weird," he said, standing in my apartment doorway with a small bouquet of white roses. given everything that happened. But I've been thinking about it for a while, and I realized I'd regret it if I didn't at least ask. I stared at the roses, then at him. Marcus, who had been there through the worst of it, who had held me up when I couldn't stand, who had seen me at my absolute lowest and never once looked away. Are you sure? I asked. I'm still figuring out who I am. I'm not the same person I was before. I know, he said. That's part of why I'm asking. I saw you at your worst, Ethan, and I saw you fight your way back. That's the person I want to get to know. The real you. I took the roses, my hands trembling slightly. Okay. Yes. I'd love to go on a date with you. His smile was slow and warm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was stepping toward something rather than running away from something. Dinner was simple, a small Italian place with red checkered tablecloths and candles in mason jars. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his family, his childhood, the things that made him who he was. I told him about my fears, my dreams, the version of myself I was still learning to become. You're different, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Not just from when you were with Julian, from when I first met you. You're lighter somehow. I feel lighter, I admitted. I spent so long trying to be what someone else wanted that I forgot I was allowed to just be myself. He squeezed my hand. I like who you are. All of it. The kiss came at the end of the night, soft and tentative, like he was testing the waters. I leaned into it, letting myself feel the warmth of it without overthinking. When we pulled apart, he was smiling. I've wanted to do that for a while, he said. How long? Since the hospital. When I saw you standing up to Julian for the first time. That's when I knew. I laughed, the sound surprising me. You fell for me at my most dramatic moment. I fell for you when you stopped being afraid to be yourself. We stood there in the moonlight, hands intertwined, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope of survival, but the steady, quiet hope of possibility. Thanksgiving was the first holiday I celebrated with my new family, Ivy, Marcus, and a handful of friends who had become something more. Ivy's apartment was filled with the smell of roasting turkey and the sound of laughter, and I found myself smiling more freely than I had in years. Marcus was in the kitchen, helping Ivy with the gravy, their easy banter filling the space with warmth. I sat on the couch, watching them, feeling a quiet contentment settle over me. You're staring, Ivy called out, catching my eye. And you're smiling. It's weird. I'm allowed to smile, I said. It's a holiday. It's a holiday you used to dread. She wasn't wrong. Thanksgiving with Julian had always been a performance, dressing up, pretending to be happy, fielding questions about wedding plans from his family while he sat silently beside me. This was different. This was real. Marcus brought me a plate of food, settling onto the couch beside me. You look happy, he observed. I am happy. Is that allowed? Absolutely. He kissed my forehead. You've earned it. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the guests had gone home, Marcus and I sat on Ivy's tiny balcony, looking out at the city lights. I never thought I'd have this, I said quietly. A real family. People who actually care about me. A life that feels like it's mine. You always deserved it, Marcus said. You just had to get out of your own way. I had to stop believing I wasn't worth fighting for. Are you there now? I thought about it, about the long road I had traveled, the setbacks and breakthroughs, the slow process of rebuilding. I'm getting there, I said. Some days are easier than others, but I'm not giving up anymore. Marcus pulled me close, and we sat there in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below us. It wasn't a grand moment, but it was perfect, because it was mine. I received a letter from Julian 6 months after our breakup. It was handwritten, in the careful, precise script I remembered from the early days of our relationship, when he used to leave me notes on the bathroom mirror. Ethan, I know I don't have any right to contact you. I know I hurt you in ways I'm still trying to fully understand. But I've been in therapy for the past few months, and my therapist suggested I write this letter, not to win you back, but to take responsibility for what I did. I was selfish. I was so consumed by my own ambitions that I couldn't see the person right in front of me. I made you feel small because it was easier than confronting my own failures. I dismissed your pain because acknowledging it would have meant acknowledging my own inadequacy. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm just asking you to know that I see it now, all of it. The way I let you down. The way I broke you down. The way I made you feel invisible when you should have felt cherished. I don't expect to hear back from you, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better. Not for you, for myself. Because I finally understand that the person I was wasn't someone I could live with. I hope you're happy. I hope you found someone who sees you the way you deserve to be seen. And I hope that one day, you'll be able to look back on our time together without pain. I'm sorry, Ethan. For everything. Julian. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Not because I wanted him back, I didn't. But because it was the closure I hadn't known I needed. Acknowledgement. Accountability. The recognition that what I had experienced was real. Marcus found me in the bedroom, the letter crumpled in my hand. He didn't ask what it said. He just sat beside me and waited until I was ready to talk. It's from Julian, I finally said. He apologized. Marcus's expression didn't change, but I could feel him tense slightly. How do you feel about that? Relieved, I think. Not because I needed his apology, but because it proves I wasn't crazy. What happened was real, and he finally admitted it. Does this change anything? I looked at him, at this man who had seen me through the worst and stayed. No, it doesn't change anything about us. It just closes something I didn't know was still open. He pulled me into his arms. I'm proud of you for not letting this pull you back. I'm done being pulled back, I said. I'm moving forward. A year after our first date, Marcus proposed on the same balcony where we had spent so many evenings talking. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and he dropped to one knee with a small velvet box in his hand. I know I'm not perfect, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know I can't erase the past or undo the hurt you've been through. But I can promise you this. I will never make you feel invisible. I will never dismiss your pain. I will always see you, Ethan, exactly as you are, and I will love you for all of it. I was crying before he even opened the box. Yes, I said. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, simple, elegant, perfect, and pulled me into his arms. I love you, he whispered. I've loved you since the moment I saw you standing up to Julian in that hospital room. I love you too, I said. Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for waiting for me to be ready. He kissed me, and the world felt full of possibility. We were married on a spring afternoon, surrounded by the people who had helped me find my way back to myself. Ivy was my maid of honor, tears streaming down her face throughout the entire ceremony. My mother sat in the front row, her hand clasped in my father's, both of them beaming with pride. Marcus's vows were simple and heartfelt. I promise to always see you, he said. Not just the parts that are easy to love, all of it. The fears, the flaws, the fight. I promise to love you not despite who you are, but because of it. My vows came from the same place. I spent so long trying to be what someone else wanted that I forgot I was allowed to be myself. You reminded me. You showed me that I deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be loved exactly as I am. I promise to never hide from you. I promise to always fight for us. And I promise to never forget that I am worthy of love, because you taught me that. We kissed, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Ivy was sobbing openly. Marcus's mother was crying too. And I felt, for the first time in my life, completely and utterly whole. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen. I was cherished. I was home.